So what I thought I would do is go talk a little bit about some of the innovations in online that I've noted in my job. So my name's Sarah, and I'm technology editor is my current title at journalism.co.uk. Now, journalism.co.uk, we're a news site that reports on innovations in the digital news industry. So every day I'm kind of looking out for interesting things and writing stories, creating podcasts, creating videos about the types of things that you'll see today. So pretty much every case study that I'm going to talk about, if you want more background information on it, if you want to kind of work out how a different news outlet did something, you'll probably find it on our site on journalism.co.uk. So what I thought I'd do is go through a couple of kind of very recent case studies and then take different topics. So we'll be looking at social, we'll be looking at data journalism, we'll be looking at interactives and all sorts of different things in between, and video and some of the latest things that are happening. So the first thing I wanted to do is just get you to keep this phrase in mind during my presentation, this idea of shareable content, making stuff that people want to share on social, because, that's how people are finding our news these days. Social has become this force, and we need to think about how we create stuff that people want to share on Facebook, on Twitter, on other platforms. So I just wanted to flag that up as an initial thing. And just a couple of stats, just to kind of focus our attention. Overall, social is now the biggest traffic driver aside from direct. So 26% of traffic is now social. That's from a recent study from Chartbeat. They're a massive analytics platform, so have data on loads and loads of news sites. Now, social in this case includes dark social, to use the kind of slightly mysterious term, and that includes email, because email is very social in itself. When you send a link around to your friends, if somebody sends me a link to a news story, I'm going to click on it because it's a personal recommendation. And actually, social visitors on average are a better source of traffic. They're generally new. So overall, 31% of traffic to news sites is new visitors, and 41% of social visitors are new. So if we're thinking about engaging with new audiences, perhaps with younger audiences, then I just wanted to really get this idea in our heads about social. I know that you all know it, but just to kind of focus the beginning of the presentation. And also, I want you to keep in mind, every case study I talk about, I want you to think about mobile. Because, of course, social traffic is also highly mobile. Overall, 25% of traffic to news sites is from a mobile phone these days. And 40% of social traffic is mobile. We've all done it. We're on the tube, we're on the metro, we're on the bus, and we're checking our phones. We're going through. So everything has to work on mobile. It's kicking on for 50% now. And what I'm going to talk about is some traditional publishers, the BBC, The Guardian, the CNN, etc. But also, I want you to bear in mind these two graphs from August. Look at how many people are, or how many news sites are the new players. BuzzFeed wasn't around 10 years ago. It's now the number one most shared news outlet on Facebook. It's Upworthy. Maybe few of us have heard of in our circles. It's a bit like BuzzFeed. That's now number 4. So there's some new players to the scene. So I think unless traditional publishers really kind of focus and hone their digital strategies, then we're now competing in a different landscape. Okay, the New York Times might have been around for more than 100 years, but it has to reassess and reevaluate and constantly push, because it's an open playing field now. So I really wanted to kind of not only flag up those traditional kind of Swedish public radio type traditional broadcasters, traditional publishers, but I want you to think about some of the new people that we're in a sense competing with. This is one very recent game changer, if you like. Business News, it might sound a little dry to many of us, but they're a new site. They launched a year ago. They're from Atlantic Media Company in the US, so a very traditional publisher, and they've created what they call this digitally native platform. So that doesn't look much like a traditional news site. It looks quite different. It's pared down. It's created for the web. They've rethought what a website should look like without having that legacy of a newspaper or a broadcaster behind them. Look at this one story, for example. This is just something I picked at random. You can see how this content is very shareable. It's quite pictorial. It's a story about what didn't happen during the US government shutdown. So Quartz, it's just a year old, but I've been interested to follow them, and there's some lessons that I think that we can all learn from this very new kid on the block, if you like. One of the things that they tell their journalists is we don't create 500 to 800 word articles. On social, we're thinking about shareable content here. People like to share short, pithy, snappy news stories or comment pieces, or they really like really in-depth, long stuff. I mean, I don't know, you personally have probably spent a whole train journey reading a very long-form article on a tiny little screen. That's what people are doing, and they're really not going for anything in between because it's neither short nor long, those kind of 600, 800 word pieces. So I think that's something we can all kind of learn from and question next time we write a 700 word article. I'm not saying there's no place for 700 word articles, but it's just something that's worth bearing in mind, I think. You live or die by the article page. Particularly if you're a news site like Quartz, people aren't coming to your homepage, as they get 10% of their traffic from their homepage, so it's kind of quite minor. So you live or die by the type of stories you're creating. On social, people come through the side door. They're not coming to your front door. So people who have perhaps not come across a particular brand, this brand has an opportunity to get new audiences, but they're coming not from the homepage, but by the side door. And therefore, every page has to be a homepage. So with Quartz, any key messages they want to get across from marketing, they know that message has to be within an article. So the article page is really, really important. Another thing they tell the journalists, which I think is really useful, is write your headline before your story, and write that headline for social. So when you're thinking about a story, what does it look like as a tweet? What does it look like on Facebook? And what Quartz believes is if you can't do that, then it's probably not a story for their site. Okay, every site is different. They're a very, very social site. I think they get about 45% of their traffic from social, from light social, and from dark social, the email, the instant messenger, the people sharing in that way, they get about 20% of their traffic. This is a very, very new case study. This is 6 months old, Us versus Them. It was launched by Trinity Mirror, which in the UK has a group of newspapers. There's lots of local newspapers, and they have the Daily Mirror, which is a tabloid, a left-leaning tabloid. Now, they've never done very well online because they didn't really know how to do the web, and they've kind of been left behind now. But what they've decided to do is have this kind of internal startup fund. So they're funding new businesses to hopefully make some money down the line for Trinity Mirror. One is called Us versus Them. This is a bit like a British BuzzFeed, so they're creating very shareable articles. If you don't know BuzzFeed, they do things like, it's a big topic in itself, but they do kind of lists of, 10 cat gifs, but they also do some more serious stuff. So it's the kind of stuff that people want to put on Facebook, for example. How Us versus Them has positioned themselves, and they're just a team of six people, so they've got one developer, one designer, and 2 or 3 journalists and an editor. And they come together and they create what they call toys. They're kind of interactives. This is one they published last Friday, so less than a week ago. I don't know how much of this is going to get lost in translation, but the British, if you don't know, have an absolute obsession with the North and the South, and it's the divide. So Northern people are very sociable, and this is a massive generalization, but they also have different eating habits, and the South people tend to be ruder, and so I'm not going to spend the next 10 minutes trying to explain our obsession with class. But this toy, this interactive, really captured that. So it was a little test, and it got people to go through a series of 4 or 5 questions and to find out how northern they were. And that people were encouraged to tweet the result or share the results. Bearing in mind this was published on Friday, let's look at the figures. It's had more than 1 million Facebook shares. 3 million Facebook interactions. It's had 41,000 tweets. I took this screen grab on Tuesday, so it will have had even more now. And when I started thinking about this presentation on Sunday, I kind of went to a coffee shop and I was thinking, okay, and I was looking through my Facebook feed and I realized that my friends, my Facebook contacts have probably never heard of Us Versus Them, this very new news site, but everybody was sharing this game. So it's something that's kind of really gone viral, really taken off. Malcolm Coles from The Mirror said, I saw this tweet from him. He said there was 20,000 people playing it at any one time when he went to bed that was on Saturday night. And when I asked him on Tuesday of this week, it had had 3.6 million uniques. Okay, it's not news, but it's something that's very shareable, good for the brand, good for getting new people, good for getting a social audience, good for getting younger people, who I think we all want to kind of bring into our news sites. Let me go through some of the case studies now. So I'm going to start giving you a couple of examples, 2 or 3 examples under a couple of different banners. So let's think about social and who Jay Rosen has called the talking to the people formerly known as the audience. So I'm not talking here of how we get more traffic from social. These are just a couple of examples, 2 or 3 examples that I've noticed of people doing interesting things in terms of engaging with the audience. And I'm well aware there's some great examples from Swedish Public Radio too, but I know that you probably know those, so I'm going to focus on a couple of different ones. The Financial Times. Facebook, I think it was about 6 or 8 months ago, launched a new feature called Facebook Q&A. It's a live chat facility, so a bit like in a Reddit Ask Me Anything, or a bit like a live tweeting session. Then you can put a big name journalist, perhaps, like the Financial Times has done. NBC has also done this with some of its kind of broadcasters. You arrange a time, they're going to come online to talk about a particular topic, and then people from the Facebook page can dive in and ask questions. So it's that real kind of nice engagement thing around an interesting topic. So it's something that I think some news sites have had varying degrees of success with. I know for big broadcasters, and I think for radio stations in particular, it could be very interesting because you've got that very social audience already who are used to feeding back, who are used to talking to you. And of course, you've got household name journalists. ProPublica, they've done something quite interesting around creating Facebook groups. So what they've done, and they've done this with a number of groups, this is one that they've kicked off around patient harm, so malpractice in hospitals or in the medical profession. So they created this group, and as a result of this group, they've got lots of feedback. They've got lots of people who've got personal experiences of the health service. I think they've also got a cancer group going on, so people who've have been cancer sufferers. So what has ProPublica, this investigative news site in the US, got out of it? Well, they've got some stories. They've got a place where they can go and put different topics to their audience and see how it washes. They've got new contacts, they've got new experts, they've got new sources. And what happens now is a very hands-off approach. So the people in the Facebook group are talking to each other and actually almost providing a support network for one another. And then every so often, ProPublica journalists can dive in and talk to them and really get something out of it. But I think not only has it created this quality community that they've got clear benefits from, but it's actually creating something that lives on outside ProPublica and does something quite nice for the community and their brand. So I'm going to move on now to a couple of data journalism examples. I know data journalism is something that's talked about in a lot of places, probably done in fewer places, but I think we are seeing now, because its nature of being very shareable, I think we will only see an increase in data journalism projects. This one is from Latvia, and I can't remember the exact population of Latvia, but I think it's around 2 million. What they did, when I met the person who set up Baltica, which is this kind of investigative journalism group, she's called Inga Springer, and she was telling me that in Latvia, then the people who control how much an individual pays for their heating and electricity in their block of apartments, the person who controls that is the manager of the building. So everybody's paying different rates, and obviously in a cold country, then people are feeling like they're getting ripped off or paying too much. So they did a crowdsourcing exercise, and they sent around a Google form to people to find out how much they were paying for heating, how much they were paying for electricity, and they managed to anonymize them, so put them in the local area, so within the block, but didn't put the apartment number. And they created this map. And what I quite like about this project is the fact that they didn't just do it themselves. So they were an independent organization, an investigative journalism organization, but they went to the TV station, they went to the radio station, they went to the online news provider, they went to the newspaper, and they kind of did this collaboratively. So working together was worked quite successfully for them. They plotted not all of them on a map because they couldn't verify everything, but that you can see from this map that they've got 2,406 responses plotted, which in a country, like I say, of about 2 million, I don't think is a bad response at all. And I think a lot of people were talking about it. They also got some really nice radio pieces for it, TV pieces. So you can imagine that the person who's paying the most for their electricity versus the person who's paying the least for their electricity. So you can see you can get not just a map, you get lots of stories out of that. This one, slightly closer to home, is from Finland, and there's one of the journalists there who writes a lot about the environment, went to the data desk, there's a data desk at the newspaper, and said, look, I've got this big spreadsheet I've been sent with the location of wolves in Finland. So it was a big database. It was a spreadsheet with 55,000 wolf locations in, but it had the location data in. So between the journalist and the data desk, they were able to plot these on the map. And of course, that was something that really engaged people. How close do I live to where wolves have been spotted? You know, and it's very shareable again. So it's quite a nice, quite different type of story to map and to make very personal to people. This one's quite a different example, and something that is amazing that they're doing in Costa Rica. Excuse me. So Nacion is a newspaper and website, and they've really been pushing data. They have this incredible system where they scrape lots and lots of different websites. So they will scrape information from the planning authorities. They will scrape information from company data. And they have this product, which is a repository for data. And it's actually made by IBM, but it's also used by the CIA and the FBI. So it's this really kind of meaty repository for data. So what they do, they have this massive database that they've collected over time, and that's become a source of stories. What they call it in Costa Rica at Nacion is zero waste data. So because they're collecting this data every day, when they want to look up something historically, they've got data on it. So it's a big project. But it's had massive results. So, for example, 2 investigations they've done have led to the jailing of former presidents. So they've kind of brought down power. They've really done what I think probably all of us set out as journalists to do, you know, kind of really hold power to account. This particular example is about the properties of ministers, and they looked at the taxes they were paying and which ministers had transferred properties to their wives' names, to their family members' names, and you can see, you can interact with it, but of course that's going to result in some text-based stories as well. It's going to be some front page stories for the newspaper and for the website. So it's not just all about, I think one of the problems with data journalism, sometimes people think it's just about putting stuff on a map. I know that a friend of mine who works at The Guardian, she was saying, you know, the problem with journalists is when they start talking about data journalism, they go to developers and say, can you just put this on a map? I think data journalism, there's so much more to be done than just mapping stuff, and you can really get some interesting stories out of it. And as so one data journalist recently told me, which I thought was quite a nice way of putting it, it's the new scoop. It's the new exclusive, where online we're all competing for the same stories. You know, some things, you know, there's been a fire, we've all gone after that story. There's been a scandal, we've all gone after that story. But whereas data journalism, you get something unique, you get something exclusive that only your audience can get from your website or from your radio station. So from data journalism, let's look at a few interactives. These are slightly different. We saw one already, which was the us versus them Northometer. This example is a couple of years old now. It's from the BBC. You might have seen it. When the world population reached 7 billion, people were encouraged to put their date of birth in this little interactive to find out where they sat within the world population. And of course, that story is incredibly shareable. You say, I am number 6 billion and whatever. So this is I took this data a couple of days ago, so it's had lots of shares. Interestingly, not nearly as many as that simple toy that was created in just a day and a half from us versus them, but it had a lot of interaction, a lot of tweets, a lot of people kind of understanding the world population from where they sat within it. So I think this kind of example is really nice from how you can put the reader, how you can put the audience within the story to give them a better understanding of a story. Here's a slightly different example. This one was from last week from the Twitter IPO. So the Financial Times created this interactive where you can kind of predict or make your own estimation of what you think will happen with Twitter, the business. And here's another one from the Financial Times. This was probably about a month or two ago. This was very successful for them. They looked at what an individual's data was worth. So you can see as a reader, you want to kind of go in and you want to think, okay, what is my data worth? If I'm a homeowner, if I've got a mortgage, if I'm married, if I'm single. So again, very shareable. People were encouraged to tweet. And on the day that that was published, I remember seeing lots of tweets going around going, oh, my data's worth, 0.7 pence, or my data is worth £1 or whatever. Slightly further afield now, and ThaiPublica. So surprise, surprise, ThaiPublica is inspired by ProPublica. So for Thailand, it was a banker who set up an investigative news site. It's a couple of years old. So it's an online-only news publication which looks at big issues in Thailand. I was in Thailand in June for a conference, and apparently, there are issues that are just not being properly addressed in the kind of main press. So what they've done, they've created this investigative news site. They've created a series of interactives, and what I like about this is that they've done it with kind of an Asian twist. You can see this kind of almost manga style, this kind of Hello Kitty style of cute drawings of interactives. So here, from what I can understand through Google Translate, this one is about your taxes. So from what I can get, the tax system is about to change in Thailand. So it's about how I will be affected as a Thai person, how the individual will be affected. So here I'm guessing that you select whether you're single or whether you're married. And so therefore you get to know whether you're going to be better off or worse off. And even though this has an Asian twist, I think this is quite a nice way that can challenge what we're all doing and thinking, okay, is a drawing like that more shareable on Facebook, particularly for our younger audiences, than perhaps how you might imagine the BBC or The Guardian to create those pictures. So I think that one, I'm guessing that probably did quite well on Facebook. I haven't checked. But you can see the shareability of that type of interactive. And, of course, it's about money. Everybody cares whether they're going to be paying more or less in tax. Snowfall. You've no doubt saw this. It was a massive project from the New York Times. It was launched exactly a year ago, or maybe it was just a bit longer than a year ago now. It was this kind of beautiful, interactive, a little bit long in my personal point of view. It took me 2 hours to read. It's got videos in. It's got maps in, so you really get a sense of the story. The story is about a group of skiers, and some of them die in this terrible avalanche. And they're speaking to the survivors and they're speaking to the family members. So it's a really kind of powerful story and really doing something that can only be done online. It's kind of using the best of the internet and saying, what should that look like now? So it took a long time to make. It took 6 months to produce. It was produced in very much the same way as you might approach any text-based story, i.e. the journalist goes out, spends time with the families, spends time with the survivors, writes the story, and then it got the multimedia treatment afterwards to really think, okay, how can we better tell this story? And the results, very much shared. They were quite strategic in how they released it. They actually let a couple of key journalists know that it was going to be released a couple of days before, so they knew how to do their own PR. It got lots of Facebook shares, it got lots of Facebook likes. Interestingly, not nearly as many as that silly interactive that took a day and a half to build. This took 6 months to build, but of course this was a very good, strong piece of journalism from the New York Times, great for brand building. 6 days after it was produced, it had 2.9 million unique users visiting it. 22,000 people were looking at snowfall at any one time. A quarter to a third were new visitors, so for the New York Times, which is paywalled, or has a metered paywall, it's really key that they bring in new people. And the dwell time was 12 minutes, which for any of you who look at analytics on a daily basis, that's pretty impressive. But at the same time, it did take 2 hours to read. So I'm guessing there was some people were looking at snowfall going, isn't this cool? And spending maybe 30 seconds on it or 20 seconds on it. And other people were going through and getting to the end. This is how The Guardian launched Guardian Australia back in, I think it was the end of May they launched. They did what people then called a snowfall. They created Firestorm, which was about a fire in Australia, about a bushfire. Personally, I think this is slightly better than Snowfall. It's less dense as a reader.
Well, it was Friday morning. The previous Wednesday and Thursday, there had been a fire more north and west of us.
I think it must be about 20 kilometres away. But we knew about that because it had been burning for 3 or 4 days.
What they did there was they had some luck in the fact that they had 2 great interviewees, these 2 survivors, who could really tell the story. But that use of video, of audio, it was really powerful. They had obviously stills from during the fire, and it was incredible the way that it was kind of packaged together. The dwell time was 17 minutes. It was really effective way to kind of different type of storytelling. Again, it requires huge investments. There was a team of developers working on it for quite a while, and they also created an ebook so that they could sell it off the back of it. But I think it was a really nice example. To me, it achieved more than Snowfall in the fact that in Snowfall, sometimes you were thinking, okay, well, shall I click on the video or listen to the audio? But I think what Guardian did with Firestorm was really kind of get that balance right. So I think there's loads of other examples of these Snowfall type stories. And I think Snowfall has now become a verb in the newsroom. People are snowfalling things. But this one was a particularly nice one. And on to video, and I think video is kind of worth talking about and spending a little bit of time on because video is really changing a lot for the web. And one of the organizations I think's amazing at what they're doing is Vice. Now Vice, if you don't know, started as a fanzine, just a free pickup paper in Canada about 10 or 12 years ago. It was started by a couple of recovering heroin addicts, I think. But what they're doing now is they're creating this video, this investigative journalism that I believe is better than is being created by the BBC often or by Al Jazeera. Interestingly, this story, which is about the handover of military power in Afghanistan, the Al Jazeera also produced a video on this, and I like Al Jazeera, but this Vice one was brilliant. It really got very close to people. It spent time going around with the army, and I think it's, if you've not seen it, I really recommend it as a video anyway. But it just goes to show that there's some new players in video, and these are 20-minute documentaries, 1-hour documentaries. I think it's quite interesting what Vice does. They put them on YouTube as long documentaries as 1 hour, but also they chop them up into 3 or 4 segments so that people can either decide to watch 20 minutes at a time, which is maybe easier to consume sometimes, or they can choose to watch the full hour-long documentary. They've done a couple of really interesting documentaries on North Korea. They got access to North Korea, really fascinating. Similarly, the stuff they've done from Liberia, you know, these kind of places, to my knowledge, the BBC doesn't often go to Liberia and some of these places that are less talked about. But also they're doing stuff about cute bunnies jumping and baby sloths. So there's a real mix here of media. It's what BuzzFeed founder Jonah Peretti calls the Paris Cafe. So in the Paris Cafe, you can share ideas, you can share a book and pass it to your friend about, you know, Sartre or Nietzsche or big ideas and kind of academic, lofty stuff. Or you can lean down and pet a dog. What Jonah Peretti is trying to say with BuzzFeed is you can have all these stories about 10 cat gifs because people still want to do that. And those are the same people who want proper journalism as we think about journalism. So what BuzzFeed is doing, interestingly, it kicked off by doing lots of lists of, you know, 10 most, stupid looking cats, etc. But it's also doing proper journalism. They have a political editor, they have a media editor, they're doing some really interesting things. So I think all of us from publishers can kind of learn that we don't all have to just be that one voice. We can have more than one type of content within our umbrella. This one, and I'm going to attempt to play the video of this one because it's just short. It's quite a different type of video. This is something I noticed on The Economist last week. What they've done is created very short visualizations of some of their charts. If you read The Economist, you'll know that every day, every week, they create charts. Let's just see if I can stream this one.
Screen grab. Apple's dominance in tablets is waning. When Apple introduced the iPad in 2010, it claimed 100% of the market it itself created. But within a year, devices using Google's Android operating system began to appear and claimed 1/3 of the sales. By 2012, Apple's share further declined to only half of the market. Android tablets by Samsung, Acer, Lenovo, Amazon, and others controlled the rest. This year, Microsoft's Windows tablets grew, but is only 4% of the market. Android's share is twice as large as Apple's. But half of those tablets are made by dozens of small suppliers. Apple's market share has since shrunk to 1/3, though it still remains the largest tablet maker.
So I think that's a really nice example of something that can be... whoops, I think we've got some... so if I can turn that video off. I'm going to see the rest of the Economist videos. So I think that's a really nice example of how you can do something a bit different as an explainer. You can imagine that being shared. You can imagine that people learn a bit more by having that audio. Okay, I'm not pretending you can create it in 10 minutes, but a journalist with a bit of experience of After Effects can probably put something like that together in, I don't know, a couple of hours, I'm guessing. So I think another way that we can think about video to really help our audience understand perhaps a topic that may be a little bit complicated. This is another trend that seems to have been happening the last couple of years, particularly the last year. Just over a year ago, the Wall Street Journal launched what they called World Stream. So this was, they were getting, and they still are getting, their journalists when they're out on a story to take a little video. So that video may be, there was a reporter who was in Gezi Square in Istanbul and got tear gassed. So that was a video telling a story. It might be a journalist who is at a political rally and wants to kind of do a bit of behind the scenes stuff. It may be some breaking news. So it's a really nice touchy-feely way, and I think those videos are about 30 seconds, 40 seconds in length. So while journalists are out on stories, then they can create these little explainers, get a little bit closer to the audience with them. I think I'm right in saying that Wall Street Journal is not really found that loads of people are coming to this page to watch the different types of video it has from its correspondents, but what it is finding that when an individual journalist tweets a video of them it will get a lot of traction, or it'll get some interest. One really nice example they did was when the Costa Concordia, the ship, was being pulled up. One of the journalists happened to be there. He was on holiday, and he realized that people were taking tours, giving pedalo tours around the Costa Concordia, this kind of awful scene that had killed so many people, yet it turned into a tourist destination. So that made a very short, shareable video. So I think over the next year or two, I think we might see a lot more news organizations trying this. This is something that's happened obviously just this week. The BBC News has really gone to town, I should say, on Instagram. It's not built a massive Instagram community quite yet. It's got about 2,000 followers. Organizations like Time have got loads of followers. They've been on there for ages. But I think what the BBC is doing here is really interesting. So what they're doing is sharing 15-second videos. So you can see what they're doing in this case.
People lost all of their food, all their rice was damaged in the storm. It's now the 5th day since the storm. Supplies are running out. You can see the result. There's still a sense that aid is not getting in here.
So that was clearly taken from a longer TV package, a 15-second clip to tell the story of the typhoon. Yeah, as a journalist, you may be kind of a bit cynical or a bit kind of questioning how much of a story you can tell in 15 seconds, but you can see that that's quite effective. You can see that some younger people who may not be that engaged with the BBC's output, particularly in video, you can kind of see them sharing that on Facebook or watching that. And I think that's quite an interesting development. I know that other organizations have created Vine videos, but I think it's quite interesting to see a big broadcaster like the BBC going for that shareable video. This is something Channel 4 News is doing, a broadcaster in the UK. They're also creating this very shareable video, you could say. They're explainers. So when the Nairobi terror attack happened, they've got a correspondent called Jamal Osman, it's quite interesting. He's not a traditionally trained Western journalist. He's, I don't know what nationality he is, but he's got very, very good links. So he does this great 2-minute explainer on who are Al-Shabaab. And of course, this video lives on beyond the Nairobi terror attacks. People may be still interested in that and searching for that kind of content. So it's got a long shelf life, it's got a long tail, and I think it's quite interesting using correspondents, using people with this real kind of knowledge of one area, and just sharing a simple video on YouTube. How long does that take to produce? Not very long, really. Another example from the Wall Street Journal, then this is something they did around an explainer on Obamacare. What they decided to do was, obviously Obamacare was in a sense a little bit, people were disengaged in and people were confused by. So they decided to create a first person video. So how will it affect me? And they take on, you go through the video, which is, I can't remember how long, I think about 4 or 5 minutes. You become different people. You become an office worker, you become a health professional. So how are you going to be affected by Obamacare? But the thing to note in this video is not necessarily that it's a first person video, but it's clickable. So it's created with a tool called Zentric, and what you can do as the viewer is click on the video and you can find out more. So you can find a text-based article on how much something will cost, or a related story. So kind of contextual video, as I think they've called it. Now, audio, I thought I'd include a couple of audio examples, being as you're a radio station. Perhaps these are not quite as innovative as some of the other examples, but there are a few things I've noticed over the last couple of years. So The Economist, traditionally a magazine, it's become a radio station, in a sense. It's got a Facebook page with a radio player on it. It's created a Chrome web app, a Chrome browser extension, so that people can listen to their podcasts. They produce a podcast every day, which is kind of an informal podcast. But they also have somebody reading the articles from the magazine, from the newspaper. And of course, but putting the audio on SoundCloud, you can see that they've got quite a few potentially new followers. They've got 500,000 people now following them on SoundCloud, so they're engaging with new audiences. France 24 also uses SoundCloud. It will take segments of audio that they've recorded for the TV channel, and they will embed that audio within stories to kind of make it playable and let people click on the audio. The Denver Post, of course, this awful story in the US of the Aurora cinema shooting. They were able to share the dispatch police calls. They did that via SoundCloud. Again, quite shareable, this type of content. The BBC uses a different platform. They use Audioboo. This is the Today programme, which is our kind of morning news programme. It's the flagship programme on BBC Radio 4. And they share segments of the interviews on Twitter, which is probably something you're doing as well, but it's kind of just, I know that they're quite popular. People want to go back and hear key parts of the interview. Now, you've got an election coming up next year, I understand, so I was asked to kind of think about a couple of election examples. This is a very low-tech one, if you like, and going much further afield to Sierra Leone. A group called Radar set up this system, so they decided to go out and train people in mobile reporting, so using feature phones, not smartphones, how to send SMS messages to report on what was happening around the elections. Maybe not so relevant for Sweden, but I think it was quite nice what the result was a map. So these different SMS messages ended up in a Google spreadsheet. There's a Google product that you can use for this. It's free if you're doing it internationally. And then somebody was able to moderate those, verify those different reports, and of course categorize them of what type of news it was and plot them on a map. So that was kind of an example from Africa. Back in 2010 was our last election, like your last election. And of course, in terms of digital media, that seems an absolute generation ago now. And one thing that kind of I distinctly remember because I took part in was something that happened around election leaflets. There was a kind of pressure group called the Straight Choice. And I don't know whether it happens here, but in the UK, through your door in the run-up to an election, you get all these campaign leaflets. Now, of course, these campaign leaflets make certain claims, certain promises. They take a jab at the opposing political party. So what they encourage people to do is scan them in or take a photograph of them and upload those. And then using the power of the crowd, everybody was asked to go, okay, let's have a look at the different stories that are being discussed, the different claims, the different approaches. And actually The Guardian got on board, and what this pressure group did, they created a widget so anybody could upload an election leaflet via a news site. So news sites were encouraged to add this widget, and so anybody could upload an election leaflet and then kind of monitor them. The other thing that they did at the time was asked people to look at Google AdWords and notice how much political parties were spending on Google ads. So again, using the power of the crowd in the run-up to an election. The Washington Post last year for the US election did something quite interesting. In 12 swing states, they got students to go out and blog, to create a Tumblr blog. Again, how do you engage younger people around an election? Their solution was to go to 12 swing states, use 12 student journalists and get them to chronicle the election. Swing states, like the states that were most critical, the ones that could be, that could have gone either way. And this is another thing from the Washington Post. This used what I can, from my understanding, it used a series of surveys and reports from quite well-known academics and people who'd kind of looked at the science behind the odds of elections. They used it to they let people calculate the odds of of Obama winning the election, and it looked at all the candidates in the past as well. So it's like a prediction thing, so a little engagement tool. This is, again, back in the dark days of 2010. It was, I think a lot of people have done this kind of stuff as well. Who should I vote for? So it was a little quiz, so you get to put in your views, your political allegiances, what you think about green issues, and it tells you your results, who you should vote for. Who are you most aligned to in your belief systems? And I know more recently, Finland has had an election and also done this kind of thing. Again, it's quite shareable, it's quite interactive, it's quite sticky for the reader. This is a kind of a similar idea, takes it perhaps a stage further. It was, again, you use this sliding scale to work out what's most important to you in the election, and these two, Obama and Romney, change depending on who you're most allied to. The New York Times, what they decided was back last year, there's a huge kind of cacophony of voices on Twitter, on social media, all journalists reporting the same thing from the election. So what they decided to do was act on Twitter more like a fact checker. They set up this hashtag AskNYT, and they encouraged people to ask questions, and also during the political debates flag up statements that they wanted New York Times journalists to check. So using Twitter for, in a sense, deeper engagement rather than just, this person's saying this person's saying this, but to really kind of use the audience and talk to the audience, find out what direction your editorial should take from what they think. And of course they created a map. This was a predictive map based on previous results. Al Jazeera, I like this example from Al Jazeera. It's got its problems, but what they did, they took the transcripts of the debates and they married them up with the video, and what they did, they allow you to put in a keyword. So I've put in here women, for example, and what it's done, because it's attached to the text of the speeches, you can see how many times Romney mentioned women, how many times Obama mentioned women, and it tells you at what point in the video, and you can jump to those points in the video of when that keyword was mentioned. So it's really clever. The downside, obviously, it doesn't happen quite in real time because they have somebody. I think it's C-SPAN in the United States. They have the service which transcribes everything. But of course, people are generally watching the debates live. But I think it's kind of interesting the way people can explore those issues slightly deeper and can also obviously share their results. How often were women mentioned during the debates, and share that on Twitter or Facebook. And just this is kind of the final category of stuff that I wanted to talk about. And I think we've all been there. We've kind of felt a bit like Reporter Barbie, where we've been asked to take out a video camera and take out a mobile phone and take out a laptop and do all that. But these are some innovative news gathering things that I think go beyond that, using technology in a slightly different way. Homicide Watch. This is a US website run by, initially it was run by just one person who set up on her own. It aims to report on every homicide, on every murder in Washington, D.C. So the person who runs this, Laura Amico, she'd got a report from the police log that there'd been a murder on a particular day. This is from 2011. Now, because she knows her audience very well, or rather her audience are coming to her for a particular type of news, she went into her Google Analytics. And you can see from these are the search terms people were using. They were using the search term of killing of Jamal. So from this, you can almost see that her story's kind of been, not exactly written for her, but she's got some leads. The police log didn't give her a name, it didn't give her a location, it just gave her that something had happened. So I quite like this example of, using Google Analytics or using an analytics platform in a very different way. So you can kind of, start to see what, if people in the community know they're coming to you for information. What are they coming for? Oh, they know more information than you. Again, a nice example, quite different this time, is reporting from Instagram. Instagram, as we all know, has become very popular. It's now owned by Facebook. This is the wall at the Boston Globe. They call it Snap. And this amazing screen shows every geolocated Instagram picture in real time. And I think we'd all quite like a snap wall in the newsroom, but we haven't got them. And what they did was, the story I picked up on was just after Hurricane Sandy. Now, obviously for this, you have to bear in mind that Boston is, aside from New York, people's homes are not flooded, people are not, their lives are not completely turned upside down, but the schools were off and the businesses were off. So what looking at this wall in the newsroom, people suddenly started realizing actually what people were doing on the day off. They were sharing pictures of a bottle of whiskey, pictures of their friends in a pub, pictures of a bar. So they did this kind of fun, light-hearted story about people are actually using the time off to go and do some daytime drinking. And like I say, just bear in mind that this was not the epicenter, if you like, of Hurricane Sandy. This was a little bit further afield. So they got a light-hearted story about it. And I just thought I'd flag up this tool. Many of you might know it, called If This Versus That. It's a way that you can connect different accounts. And if you are interested in tracking Instagram, you can connect your Instagram account with a Google spreadsheet. So I did this just for an example for Warsaw. And you can automatically save, therefore, every picture tagged Warsaw into a Google spreadsheet. So you could do it for, your tiny little place in Sweden or whatever, and just find out if there are key photos being shared. So that was just a little extra tip. And again, this is quite a different example. Google Earth has a timeline tool, so you can look at a satellite image over time. Now, this is obviously has a big impact if you know anything about Sri Lanka, which I'm sure you do. This is towards the end of the Civil War. This is the same stretch of land. You can see in the picture on the left that there are camps, there are people living there, and on the right, there's nobody living there. Now, once you know a bit of context about Sri Lanka, and somebody tells you that these round circles on the right are marks from artillery, from shells, then there's a story in there. That's a very visually dramatic story of here were some people, here now is a barren area, and of course, that's in a very complicated situation where there's been blame and all sorts of political wrangling, then actually having some pictures like that. But you could do it obviously for a much lighter story. Google Earth satellite images are available. You just put in the 2 dates you want, and you can compare the pictures. So you could think of any number of stories to do that around that are perhaps not quite so of world significance. And this is my final example. This is something the LA Times, the Los Angeles Times is doing, and something that I've called, when I wrote about it, called robot reporting. What the LA Times does, it has one of its journalists who's quite technically able has written an algorithm that sits over the top of reports coming from the Geological Survey in the US. Bear in mind, we're in LA, we're thinking earthquakes here. So what happens is, this news story has not been written by a journalist, this has been written by that algorithm. When an earthquake strikes and registers above a certain level on the Richter scale, that will automatically generate a story. So here you can see, obviously what it's saying is, okay, when a quake strikes, put the number first in the headline, and then strikes near is probably a bit of text, and then you put the location. And then, then that's completely written by the computer. It knows that it's a shallow magnitude quake, reported on Friday. So what's and it's been able to plot it on a map. And of course, I think when this was, I saw a couple of comments on Twitter after I reported on this story, that people were, that robots were going to replace journalists. Of course, that's ridiculous. Journalists were only going to be sitting in the newsroom at 5:36 a.m. in the morning, taking that same information, copying it and pasting it. The journalist then moves on and goes out and gets the real story and finds out how many people were affected. But of course, after an earth tremor, surely people are going to come to your site quite quickly. So I think that's a really nice example from the LA Times. And just finally, it also does it with crime stories. Every Monday morning, the LAPD, the Los Angeles Police District, publishes a list of crime reports. They've set up a scraper, and what happens is the data is scraped from that PDF, that list of police reports, and a story is automatically written. So the automatic bit in this is the bit in red. So we know that Travis Solario, a 26-year-old Latino, was shot and killed. That was written by the computer. It's obviously taken the right information in that order, given it the headline. Then, when the journalist comes across it, they do, they make a couple of calls, they find out a bit more, and they add to the story. But the stuff that might have taken the journalist 20 minutes, half an hour to write, to plot on a map, to write that nice kind of table at the side, to kind of give extra context, extra information, then that's been done for the journalist. So I think that's quite a nice example of how computers can really help us do more, rather than, hey, we're not going to get all terrified by this, and there is obviously journalists are required to provide the context and the verification on all these stories. So those are all the examples. Thank you.